Hey, dear members of the Soul Stories family. Today we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Chapter 1. Prologue, The Hug. A light drizzle fell steadily on the cobblestone streets of Portland, Oregon, like a thin veil draped across the gray sky. It was late October, and the autumn air carried the characteristic chill of the Pacific Northwest. Emily Carter, 29, stepped out from the back door of Powell's Books, the city's most famous used bookstore, dragging a heavy black trash bag behind her. She wore a faded yellow raincoat with worn sleeves, her damp light brown hair clinging to her cheeks. Her old rubber boots hit the ground, making soft squelching sounds on the wet alley pavement that led behind St. Mary's Church. Her breath puffed out in small white clouds in the cold air. She paused for a moment, looking up at the vibrant red maple leaves trembling under the rain, as if they too were trying to hold on to the last traces of warmth before the long winter. It was a rare peaceful moment in her busy workday, sorting old books, chatting with customers, and sometimes quietly reading a page in a hidden corner of the shop. But then a strange sound broke the stillness, a stifled, broken sob echoing from the deep shadows of the alley. Emily tilted her head, listening. The crying wasn't loud, but it carried a pain she could feel, like an old wound torn open. She set the trash bag down, wiped her hands on her faded canvas apron, and walked slowly toward the sound. The rain soaked through her coat, making her shiver slightly, but she didn't care. Something about that cry stirred her heart, an instinct she couldn't explain. As she drew closer, the faint glow of a distant street lamp illuminated a figure. A man sat slumped beside a dumpster, his head bowed, shoulders shaking. He wore an expensive black suit, but it was disheveled, soaked and stained from the ground. His polished leather shoes were caked with mud, and his hand clutched a small, glinting object, a gold wedding ring, lying abandoned on the pavement like a discarded promise. He didn't look up, only continued to cry, his suppressed sobs as if he were trying to hide his pain from the world, but failing. Emily stood still for a moment, her breath blending with the patter of the rain. She didn't know who he was or what had reduced a man in such an elegant suit to this broken state, but she understood that feeling, the sense of loss, of emptiness, like when she stood by the graves of her parents and little brother after the car accident 7 years ago, or when she discovered her fiancé, the man she'd trusted completely, embracing her best friend in the apartment they'd chosen together. 3 years since canceling her engagement, she'd learned to keep going, not by forgetting, but by opening her heart to those who needed her. And right now, this man clearly needed someone. Without another thought, Emily stepped forward and knelt beside him. Her knees touched the cold ground, rainwater seeping through her thin jeans, but she didn't notice. She placed a hand on his shoulder gently, the way she'd once comforted children lost in the bookstore looking for their mothers. He flinched, looking up briefly, his eyes red and blurred with tears and rain, then dropped his head again, as if ashamed to be seen at his weakest. But Emily didn't leave. She pulled him into a hug, not too tight, just enough for him to feel her presence. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the damp earth and rain, creating a strange fragrance she'd never forget. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered, her voice soft but firm, like a promise. "I'm just here." He didn't reply, but she felt his body gradually relax in her arms. His crying quieted, blending into the steady sound of the rain. They sat like that for a long time. Two strangers, nameless, without pasts, connected only by shared pain in the dark alley. Emily didn't ask anything, didn't need to know who he was or what had happened. To her, sometimes a hug was enough to say what words couldn't reach. Finally, when his sobs stopped completely, Emily let go. He still didn't look up, just silently wiped his face with a wet sleeve. She stood, intending to leave, but then her eyes caught the wedding ring lying on the ground. It was tiny, glinting under the streetlight, like a shard of a shattered dream. She bent down to pick it up, her cold fingers brushing the cool gold. She didn't know why she did it. Maybe instinct, maybe curiosity. But she quietly slipped the ring into his suit pocket, then turned away without another word. As she walked back to the rear door of Powell's, the rain continued its steady rhythm, like a wordless, sad song. She glanced back one last time. The man still sat there motionless, but the ring was now in his pocket, a mystery she wasn't sure she wanted to unravel. She closed the door and returned to the bookstore, where old shelves and the smell of damp paper awaited her. But in her heart, a strange feeling lingered, as if that hug hadn't just been for him, but for her too, a part of herself she'd buried long ago. Stepping inside, Emily pulled off her raincoat and hung it on the wooden hook by the door, revealing a simple gray sweater underneath. She brushed back her wet hair, water droplets trailing down her hands, and let out a soft sigh. This wasn't the first time she'd done something like this, helped a stranger with no expectation in return. For her, it was the only way to keep her heart beating after everything she'd lost. Emily, 29, was a gentle and kind woman, but she carried scars that could never fade. 7 years ago, her life shattered when her entire family, her father, mother, and little brother, died in a car accident on R5. A drunk driver had crashed into their car on the way back from a camping trip in Tillamook Forest, a trip she would have joined if not for a weekend shift at Powell's. She survived, but the cost was sleepless nights wondering why she hadn't been with them. Then 3 years ago, before that old wound could heal, a new one tore open. Ethan, her college fiancé, the man she'd dreamed of building a new family with, betrayed her. She found him embracing Sarah, her best friend since high school, in the apartment they'd picked out together just 2 months before their wedding. Emily called off the engagement immediately, returned the ring she'd once cherished, and cut all ties. Since then, she'd chosen a quiet life at Powell's Books, where old books and other people's stories became her refuge. She didn't seek love or attention, but she was always ready to lend a hand to those in need, whether patiently helping a customer find a rare book or quietly packing stacks of used books to send to poor children in rural Oregon. For Emily, kindness wasn't something she tried to show. It was the fragile thread tying her to the world, and perhaps the only way she knew to heal herself. Chapter 2. The Groom Left Behind. The next morning, Portland awoke to a rare, restless energy. The rain had stopped, leaving shimmering puddles on the sidewalks and a faint scent of damp earth in the air. Emily stood behind the counter at Powell's Books, flipping through the pages of an old book about Northwest trees, when Jade, her short-haired, green-dyed co-worker, strode in and slapped the latest issue of Willamette Week onto the counter with a loud thwack, her voice brimming with excitement. "Have you seen this?" Emily looked up, her light brown eyes scanning the bold headline. Tech billionaire Alexander Reed left at altar. Fiancé vanishes before vows. Below it was a blurry photo of a man in a suit standing before an elegant but empty wedding reception table. The article detailed how Alexander Reed, 32, CEO of a prominent social tech company, had been abandoned by his fiancée just before their wedding at a luxurious downtown Portland hotel. No explanation, no trace. The bride simply disappeared 2 hours before the vows. Jade giggled, shaking her head. Drama like this? The whole city'll be buzzing for a week. They say he's cold as ice, but getting ditched like this probably melted him down to water. Emily gave a faint smile but didn't reply. She didn't care for gossip, yet the name Alexander Reed stirred an odd feeling in her, like an unclear puzzle piece. So she closed the book and turned back to sorting a stack of children's books slated for the Gresham Community Library by the weekend. The news spread through Portland like wildfire. By noon, Stumptown Coffee, a few blocks from Powell's, was abuzz with whispers from hipster groups clutching artful lattes, eagerly discussing the jilted billionaire. Some joked that he'd probably programmed an AI bride that glitched and deleted itself. While on social media, the hashtag Reed left at altar climbed the ranks with paparazzi shots of him leaving the hotel, face impassive, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. But no one knew that the night before, he'd been slumped in the alley behind St. Mary's Church, broken in the arms of a stranger. And Emily, the one who'd held him, had no idea the name in the headlines belonged to that same man. 3 days later, the bell above Powell's door jingled as a man stepped inside. Emily was perched on an old wooden ladder, holding a stack of hardcovers, when she heard steady footsteps approaching. She turned, and her heart skipped a beat. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood there, wearing a dark gray wool coat instead of the soaked black suit she'd seen before. His dark hair was neatly combed, but his deep blue eyes, no longer red-rimmed, still carried the weariness of sleepless nights. In his hand was a crumpled scrap of paper with a few handwritten lines. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low and slightly hoarse. "Do you have The Alchemist?" Emily set the books down and stepped off the ladder, recognizing him instantly, not from the newspaper photo, but from the way his shoulders slumped slightly, as if still bearing an invisible weight. This was the man from the alley, the one she'd hugged in the rain without asking his name. She recalled that fleeting moment when they'd been there together. She'd whispered something about The Alchemist, how it was the book she'd read when she felt lost after her family's death. She hadn't expected him to remember, let alone show up here. "Do you always hug strangers in alleys, or am I just lucky?" he continued, his tone laced with faint sarcasm, but his eyes held a curiosity, as if trying to figure her out. A slight smile flickered across his lips, the first since that night, but it vanished quickly. Emily froze, her cheeks warming slightly. She wasn't good at banter, especially not with this sharp, unexpected kind. "Only when they look like they need it," she replied softly, then turned away to hide her flustered expression, heading toward the classic literature shelves. She tried to stay composed, though her mind spun. "He's Alexander Reed. The man from the alley is Alexander Reed." Before she could grab the book, a voice cut through from the counter. "Hey, isn't that the guy who got dumped?" A customer, a guy with round glasses, whispered to his friend, pointing at Alexander. The murmurs began to spread, curious eyes turning toward him. Alexander's grip tightened on the scrap of paper, his face hardening, a flash of irritation in his eyes. Emily acted quickly, stepping forward and lightly tugging his sleeve, guiding him into a secluded corner behind the sci-fi shelves where thick books blocked the crowd's view. "Don't mind them," she said quietly, her tone reassuring. "Portland loves drama, but they'll forget soon enough." He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, not as a passerby, but as someone trying to understand something. "You seem used to saving people," he said, his voice lower, the sarcasm gone, replaced by a hint of sincerity. "Let's say I am," she replied, then turned back to the shelf, pulling out a worn paperback copy of The Alchemist and handing it to him. Her hand trembled slightly, but she hid it. "This is my favorite edition. It's not new, but it has soul." Alexander took the book, his fingers brushing the cover as if weighing something. "Thanks," he said simply, but his gaze lingered on her longer than usual. He didn't mention the hug, and neither did she, but they both knew. This wasn't their first meeting, and it might not be their last. When he left, the door's bell jingled again. Emily stood by the shelves, still holding another book she'd meant to sort, watching through Powell's large glass window as he stepped onto the street. His tall figure blended into the crowd. Alexander Reed, she thought, the name now real in her mind. But to her, he wasn't the billionaire or the jilted groom from the headlines. He was just the man from the alley, the one who'd left behind a ring and a question she hadn't yet answered. Alexander Reed, 32, was a man who lived in a world of logic and power. As CEO of a Portland-based social tech company, he was known for his cold demeanor and privacy. He'd built his empire from nothing with sharp intellect and an uncanny ability to predict trends. Few knew he'd grown up in a broken family where affection was a luxury he never had. His fiancée, Sophia, had left him before the wedding because she couldn't handle the media pressure and his distance. A blow that left him feeling out of control for the first time. Emily's hug in the alley was something he hadn't expected, and The Alchemist was why he'd returned, not just for the book, but for a flicker of light in the darkness he wasn't ready to admit. Chapter 3. Awkward Acquaintances. In the days following their first encounter at Powell's Books, Alexander Reed began showing up more often, an unspoken habit neither he nor Emily addressed. At first, he came with simple excuses, buying books, usually ones Emily had mentioned during their brief embrace in the rain, like The Alchemist or other classics about the search for life's meaning. But gradually, he lingered longer, not just to browse, but to talk Deiki, though their conversations often started awkwardly and ended in silence. Emily didn't mind. She enjoyed the quiet peace of those moments. Him standing by the shelves, flipping through pages with a cool focus, while she sorted old books or jotted notes in her small notebook. Powell's, with its towering shelves and the faint scent of damp paper in the air, became their meeting place. Unplanned, unexpected, just the presence of two people who had once touched each other's pain on a rainy night. Emily kept a careful distance, never asking too much, never pressing him to say more than brief replies about books or Portland's weather. She recommended healing books she loved. The Alchemist remained her first pick, followed by Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning or The Night Circus with its gentle magic. But she never probed why he kept coming, though she could guess parts of it. Once he held the copy of The Alchemist he'd bought the week before, flipped to the first page and asked, "Do you really believe the universe helps us find what we want?" Emily smiled, replying, "I believe sometimes we have to help ourselves first, and then the universe follows." He didn't say more, just nodded slightly, but his gaze lingered on her longer than usual, as if weighing something deeper. Not everyone was as at ease with Alexander's presence as Emily. Jade, 25, her best friend and co-worker at Powell's, eyed him suspiciously every time he walked through the door. Petite, with short green-dyed hair, always in indie band t-shirts and a nose ring, Jade was the type to speak her mind, sometimes to the point of discomfort. One afternoon, after Alexander left following a brief chat with Emily about sci-fi books, Jade pulled her to the corner of the counter, voice low but wary. "He's a billionaire, Em. Alexander Reed, the guy all of Portland's talking about for getting left at the altar. You think he's for real, or just taking advantage of your kindness?" Emily frowned, setting her pen down. "What do you mean?" Jade crossed her arms, eyes sharp. "I mean you're too nice and he's... Who knows? Billionaires don't just wander into used bookstores looking for soulmates. I got conned once by a guy claiming he was an artist who got me. Turned out he just wanted rent money. I don't want you hurt again." Emily sighed. She knew Jade meant well. Jade had shared her own story of a brief fling with a deadbeat musician who ditched her after borrowing cash. He never repaid, but she shook her head. "He's not that kind of person. I don't know what he wants, but I'm not giving anything except book suggestions." Jade huffed, "Just be careful," then returned to work, leaving Emily with a fleeting doubt that quickly faded. The connection between Emily and Alexander grew, slow and hesitant, like two strangers trying to navigate an invisible wall. One stormy evening, as Portland was enveloped by wet gusts blowing off the Willamette River, Alexander arrived at Powell's later than usual, his dark gray wool coat soaked, black hair dripping onto the floor. The store was nearing closing time, with only a few straggling customers. Jade had left early, unable to stand the cold. Emily was tidying the counter when he walked in, carrying the scent of rain and a hint of loneliness. "I thought you wouldn't come in this weather," she said, half joking, half serious. He shrugged. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, and for the first time, she sensed a crack in his icy shell. They stayed late, the neon lights outside flickering through the big glass window, reflecting raindrops streaking down. Perhaps to break the silence, Alexander approached the ancient coffee machine in the corner, a relic from the 80s the Powell staff kept despite its frequent breakdowns. "Want some coffee?" he asked, holding the stained glass pot. Emily nodded, curious to see him wrestle with a machine even she didn't fully understand. He fumbled, pouring beans in awkwardly, pressing the wrong button, then spilling hot water across the counter as he tried to fix it, a black stain spreading over the wood. "Damn it," he muttered, the first time she'd seen him lose his cool, and she couldn't help it. She burst out laughing, a clear sound cutting through the stillness. Alexander looked up, surprised, then a rare smile tugged at his lips. "I'm not that bad, am I?" Emily shook her head, still laughing. "No, you just look like a kid doing chores for the first time." In that moment, under Powell's warm golden light, he looked at her as if seeing sunlight after a long winter, and she, though she wouldn't admit it, felt her heart lighten. That night, once the coffee machine finally cooperated and they sat across from each other with steaming mugs, Alexander opened up unexpectedly. "She left because she couldn't handle the pressure," he said, eyes on his cup, voice flat like he was recounting someone else's story. "The media, living with someone like me, cold, distant," she said. "I don't blame her, but I don't know how to be different." Emily listened, her hands tightening around her mug, then replied, soft but steady, "I used to think I wasn't good enough. My ex-fiancé cheated with my best friend right before our wedding. I wondered what I did wrong, but then I realized it wasn't my fault. I got through it by helping others, because then I stopped thinking about my own pain." Alexander looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, they weren't just strangers. They were two broken people trying to piece themselves back together. When he left, the rain still fell steadily outside. Emily stood behind the counter, watching his figure fade through the glass. She didn't know what was starting between them, but she felt a shift. Nothing grand or clear, just a small spark, like Powell's light on old book pages, enough to make her look forward to the next time. Chapter 4. The Start of Something Warm. As time passed, the awkward encounters between Emily and Alexander at Powell's Books became an essential part of their lives, though neither acknowledged it aloud. One afternoon in early November, with Portland still clinging to the crisp chill of autumn, Alexander walked into the bookstore with an unusual determination, holding a small ticket stamped with the Portland Book Festival logo, the city's biggest book event, where authors, publishers, and thousands of book lovers gathered each year. He set the ticket on the counter, where Emily was labeling a stack of old books, and said in a low, steady voice, "Come with me next week." Emily looked up, her light brown eyes flashing with surprise, then shook her head with a faint smile. "I'm not good with crowds, you know that. Thousands of people crammed into a convention center. It sounds suffocating just thinking about it." Alexander tilted his head undeterred. "I don't like crowds either, but I thought you'd enjoy the used bookstalls there. They even have a section for kids' books, like the ones you send out." She studied him, noticing a spark in his eyes. Not the usual cool detachment, but a rare sincerity, but she still declined. "I'll think about it, but don't get your hopes up." He didn't give up as easily as she'd expected. Over the next week, Alexander stopped by Powell's almost daily, each time with a new reason to sway her. One day mentioning an author she loved who'd be signing books, another talking about a rare book stall with imports from Europe, and once just standing by the shelves and asking, "Aren't you even a little curious?" Emily began to find his persistence amusing, but it also softened her resolve. Finally, on a Saturday morning, when he showed up with a different flyer, not for the book festival, but for a book donation event for rural Oregon kids at a small suburban library, she sighed, setting her pen down on the counter. "Fine, but just this. No festival, no crowds." Alexander grinned, a rare smile lighting up his face. "I knew you'd say yes." That day, Portland's sky unexpectedly cleared, the relentless weeks of rain giving way to rare sunshine filtering through the vibrant red maple leaves along the road to the suburbs. Emily sat beside Alexander in his sleek black SUV, feeling a touch out of place, leaving the familiarity of Powell's for something new. They arrived at a small town about 40 minutes from the city, where volunteers were setting up a book donation booth outside the community library. The atmosphere was lively but not overwhelming, with wooden tables piled with children's books, a few kids darting around unopened boxes, and the scent of coffee wafting from a tiny indie cafe across the street. Emily instantly felt more at ease. She stepped out of the car, cradling a box of old books from Powell's she'd picked out beforehand. Titles like The Very Hungry Caterpillar and Charlotte's Web, stories she believed would bring joy to the kids. Alexander, though unaccustomed to events like this, didn't stand on the sidelines. He quietly helped her arrange books on the table, his hands usually at home on a keyboard, fumbling as he stacked them, occasionally dropping a few for her to pick up. "You don't have to do this," she said, but he shrugged. "I didn't come here to watch." They worked in silence for a while until a group of kids, 5 or 6 of them, dressed in colorful fall jackets, ran over, peering curiously at the books. A curly-haired girl about 6 pointed at Where the Wild Things Are and asked, "Can you read it to us, mister?" Alexander froze, glancing at Emily for help, but she grinned mischievously and pressed the book into his hands. Go on, it's not hard. He took the book, sat on a small wooden chair among the kids, and started reading in his deep voice, though he clearly had no idea how to play the storyteller. The night Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind. He paused, attempting a monster growl that sounded more like a cough, sending the kids into giggles. Emily stood by the nearby coffee table, holding a paper cup of hot latte, unable to hold back her laughter. A bright, clear sound ringing through the peaceful space. Alexander looked up, feigning a frown. What's so funny? But even he couldn't stay serious, the corner of his mouth lifting as he saw her delight. The kids clapped and shouted, Keep going, Monster Man! And he obliged, adding a bit more expression this time, though still clumsy enough to knock over a water cup nearby. Emily watched him, sunlight streaming through the cafe window, and for the first time, she thought he wasn't the cold man from the alley anymore. He was someone learning to open up little by little. The donation event wrapped up by late afternoon, the sun dipping behind distant hills, painting Oregon's sky a brilliant orange. On the drive back, Alexander was quiet for a while, then said suddenly, I've never done anything like today. I mean, for other people with no gain. Emily turned to him, slightly surprised. So why did you? He kept his eyes on the road, his voice low but firm. Because of you. You make it look easy, like helping others is the most natural thing in the world. She didn't reply right away, just smiled, a warmth spreading through her like the rare sunshine of that day. A few weeks later, Alexander surprised her again. One morning, he arrived at Powell's not with a book or a question, but with a bigger idea. Inspired by the donation event, he'd funded a mobile library, a small truck filled with books to travel to remote Oregon areas where kids rarely got new reading material. It'll start running next month, he said, hands in his coat pockets, trying to downplay his pride. Emily stood behind the counter, eyes lighting up. Really, you're not kidding? He nodded, then pulled a small wooden box from his pocket and slid it toward her. And this is for you. She opened it, revealing an antique book press, polished walnut with intricate carvings, something she'd once dreamed of using to restore her beloved old books at the shop. Her hands trembled as she touched it, eyes welling up. Alexander, I don't know what to say. He shrugged, his voice softer than usual. You don't have to say anything. I just thought it belonged with you. When he left, Emily stood quietly by the counter, still holding the book press, gazing out Powell's large glass window. The rare Portland sunlight streamed in, illuminating the weathered shelves, and she felt a new beginning, not just for him, but for her too. Alexander was no longer the broken man from the alley, and she was no longer just someone who healed others. Together, they were creating something warm, even if it was only the start. Chapter 5. Ghosts from the Past. Winter arrived in Portland earlier than usual, bringing biting winds that swept through the cobblestone streets and rattled the large glass windows of Powell's books. Emily stood behind the counter, sorting a stack of newly arrived books, her heart lighter than ever after the warm days spent with Alexander. Their relationship had no label, no promises, but she felt a growing connection. Not love, at least not yet, but something genuine, like two imperfect puzzle pieces fitting together. Alexander still visited Powell's regularly, sometimes bringing coffee from Stumptown, sometimes just standing quietly by the shelves and asking about the old books she loved. She began to think that perhaps, after all her losses, she was finding a place to belong. But then, on a late November afternoon, with the sky gray and a steady drizzle pattering on Powell's roof, the shop's door jingled and a woman stepped inside. Not an ordinary customer, but a presence that suddenly weighed down the air. She was tall, with glossy blonde hair tied high, wearing an expensive cream fur coat, her high heels clicking rhythmically on the wooden floor. Emily looked up, mildly surprised but unconcerned, until the woman marched straight to the secluded corner where Alexander stood, holding a copy of Dune he'd intended to buy. Alex, her voice rang out, soft yet sharp. I need to talk to you. Emily froze, her hand still on a book. And then it hit her. This was Sophia, Alexander's ex-fiancée, the one who'd left him at the altar, the one all of Portland had buzzed about. Alexander set the book down, his face hardening, his deep blue eyes flashing with irritation. "Sophia," he said, his voice icy, "what do you want?" Sophia stepped closer, her hands clasped as if steadying herself. "I'm sorry, Alex. I know I was wrong to leave. The pressure, the media, everything. I couldn't handle it, but I've thought it over. I want to come back, to fix things." Her voice trembled, her eyes glistening as if on the verge of tears. But Alexander shook his head, cutting her off. "No, Sophia, I don't want to hear it. You chose to leave, and I've accepted that. There's nothing left between us." Sophia stood still, her lips pressed tight, then turned away, but not before whispering, "You'll regret this." Emily hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She was in the back stockroom, a few meters away, holding a box of old books she'd planned to shelve. Through a narrow gap in the door, she unintentionally witnessed it all. The way Sophia touched his shoulder, the flicker of hesitation in his eyes for a split second before he refused. Her chest tightened, not from jealousy, but from an old fear resurfacing. The fear that she wasn't enough, that she was just a stand-in, a temporary balm for a broken heart. She stepped back, leaning against the shelves, her trembling hand brushing the copy of The Alchemist she always kept close like a talisman. The book's words echoed in her mind. "When you want something, all the universe conspires to help you." But in that moment, she wondered, did the universe truly want her here, or was she just fooling herself? For the rest of the day, Emily couldn't focus. She dropped a book, mixed up a customer's coffee order, and when Alexander approached the counter to ask if she was okay, she forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a little tired." He didn't push, but his eyes, once bright when he read to the kids, now felt stifling. She began to rethink everything, his visits to Powell's, the stories he shared, the book press he'd given her. Was he just using her to forget Sophia? Was she merely a placeholder, a kind soul he leaned on when no one else was there? The thought lodged in her mind like a small knife piercing old scars. The car accident that took her family, Ethan's betrayal, and she told herself, "I can't let it happen again." That night in her small East Portland apartment, Emily stood before her personal bookshelf, running her fingers over The Alchemist, her eyes blurring with tears. She recalled his words about Sophia. She couldn't handle my coldness, and wondered if he'd truly rejected her, or if it was just a moment of hesitation he'd later reconsider. She flipped open the book, rereading her favorite line. "When you want something," but this time, it didn't comfort her. She snapped it shut, sat at her table, and wrote a resignation letter to Powell's manager. She couldn't stay, couldn't keep being someone's temporary fix, even if that someone was Alexander. She decided to leave, not just Powell's, but Portland, for Seattle, where a nonprofit educational organization had offered her a job months earlier. It was a chance to start over, to focus on helping others without risking her heart again. Jade was the first to know, and she wasn't happy. The next morning, when Emily arrived at Powell's to submit her letter, Jade dragged her to the counter's corner, her voice sharp. "What are you doing, Em? Quitting? Moving? Just because that billionaire talked to his old flame?" Emily sighed, trying to explain. "It's not about him, Jade. It's about me. I don't want to get caught in that cycle again, trusting someone, then finding out I'm not enough." Jade crossed her arms, eyes piercing. "You're always helping others, always healing them. Why not yourself? Running away like this, you're letting him win, or letting the past win." Emily shook her head, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not giving up. I just need time to figure out what I want." Jade huffed, turning away, but not before muttering, "I'll miss you, but I hate how you're running like this." Before leaving Portland, Emily did one last thing. Late that evening, after Powell's had closed, she used her staff key to slip inside. She walked to the secluded corner where Alexander often stood, placing The Alchemist on the small table he used for reading, along with a handwritten note. "Find your treasure." She wrote nothing more, offered no explanation, and quietly left, taking the book press he'd given her and a small suitcase of clothes. The next day, she boarded a Greyhound bus to Seattle, staring out the window as Portland faded behind the hills, her heart empty yet relieved. She didn't know if she was right or wrong, but she knew she needed distance. From Alexander, from Powell's, from the hopes she'd begun to build. Back in Portland, Alexander stepped into Powell's a few days later, looking for her as usual, only to find Jade behind the counter, her gaze cold. "She's gone," Jade said, sliding The Alchemist toward him. "She left this for you." He took the book, read her note, and for the first time in months, he felt an emptiness he couldn't explain, not because of Sophia, but because of Emily, who'd left without a goodbye. Chapter 6. The Search. The day Emily left, Alexander had no idea, still caught up in meetings and plans for the mobile library he'd funded because of her. But when he stepped into Powell's Books one weekend afternoon, carrying a Stumptown coffee as usual, he sensed something was off. The counter was empty, no sign of Emily with her gentle smile or deft hands sorting books. Jade stood there instead, her gaze cold, and before he could ask, she slid The Alchemist toward him, her voice flat. "She's gone. Left this for you." He took the book, his fingers tracing Emily's handwritten note. "Find your treasure." And for the first time in his life, Alexander Reed, a man always in control, felt panic. He looked at Jade, his voice urgent. "Gone where? When?" Jade shrugged. "Seattle a few days ago. She didn't say much, but I'd guess it's because of you and that blonde ex of yours." He stood frozen, the book heavy in his hands. A wave of loss washing over him unlike anything since Sophia left. But this time it cut deeper because he realized, too late, that it wasn't just hurt. It was love, something he hadn't recognized until she was gone. Alexander couldn't sit still. He left Powell's immediately, The Alchemist tucked into his coat pocket, and began scouring Portland for her, as if she might just be hiding somewhere in the city. He drove to the Multnomah Library, where she'd once mentioned loving to read on her days off, but found only silent shelves and strangers flipping pages. He stopped by Voodoo Donut, where she'd once bought a box of pink frosted donuts for the kids at the donation event, asking the staff if they'd seen a light brown-haired girl in a yellow raincoat. But they shook their heads, busy with an endless line of customers. He returned to Powell's daily, hoping Jade might relent and give him more clues. But she just stared at him with a mix of anger and pity. "She doesn't want you to find her, Reed. Let her be." But he couldn't, not with the book she left him weighing in his hands like a reminder, a compass he didn't know how to read. Days passed and Portland turned into a maze of memories. Every street corner, every cafe stirring thoughts of her. One drizzly morning, walking through the Pearl District, he glimpsed a brown-haired girl in a faded yellow raincoat stepping out of a small flower shop. His heart pounded. He shouted, "Emily!" across the street, his voice echoing over the hum of traffic and pattering rain. The girl turned, but it wasn't Emily, just a stranger with startled eyes looking at him like he'd lost his mind. "Sorry, my mistake," he mumbled, turning away, his face hot with embarrassment, though a foolish spark of hope flared that she might still be nearby. He stood in the rain for a moment, clutching The Alchemist in his pocket, wondering if she'd truly left him or if he just hadn't found the right place. After a week of fruitless searching in Portland, Alexander widened his hunt. He recalled a passing conversation when Emily mentioned Seattle. She'd once talked about a nonprofit educational organization there that had offered her a job, which she'd turned down to stay at Powell's. It was his only lead, and he didn't hesitate. He drove up I-5, the 170-plus mile stretch from Portland to Seattle, carrying her book like a talisman, his heart heavy but unable to stop. Seattle greeted him with a gray sky no different from Portland's, but the pace here was faster, louder, with towering buildings and bustling crowds. He didn't know where to start, only drove through neighborhoods, checked public libraries and used bookstores, even asked around Pike Place Market with the slim hope someone might have seen her. But no one knew an Emily Carter, and he began to feel like a fool chasing a shadow she didn't want him to catch. Then on a weekend afternoon, just as he was about to give up, he spotted a flyer taped to a lamppost near Capitol Hill. An event by a nonprofit educational group reading, "Storytime for Immigrant Children, bringing knowledge to the community. He wasn't sure if it was her organization, but instinct told him to go. He drove to the location, a small, warm community center with pale yellow walls and the sound of children's chatter spilling out. As he stepped inside, the alchemist still in hand, he heard a familiar voice, gentle yet clear, reading aloud. And then the boy realized, sometimes the most magical things aren't in books, but in the people you meet. He froze in the doorway, his heart skipping a beat. It was Emily, sitting among a group of immigrant kids, holding the boy who fell off the Mayflower, her eyes alight as she told the story. She wore a simple gray sweater, her light brown hair tied loosely, and her smile, the one he'd seen when he clumsily read "Where the Wild Things Are," made him forget where he stood. The kids clapped as she finished, and she stood, telling them in a warm voice, "Books don't fix people. People fix each other." Alexander's throat tightened, the book in his hand trembling as he realized what he'd denied all this time. He loved her, not because she'd saved him in that alley, but because she was the only one who made him want to be a better version of himself. He stepped forward but didn't dare speak, just stood silently in the room, watching her from afar, afraid that if he got closer, she'd vanish again. Emily turned and her eyes met his. She stopped, her hands tightening around the book, her face flashing through a cascade of emotions, surprise, confusion, then a hint of something like pain. She said nothing, just stared, and he didn't know how to begin. But the alchemist in his hand, the one she left with "Find your treasure," felt like an answer now. He'd found his treasure, not in his company, not in the things he once thought mattered, but in her, the one who'd left and forced him to search. He took a step toward her, still holding the book, his heart full of a feeling he'd never named. Not hope, not fear, but a certainty that, whether she agreed or not, he wouldn't let her disappear again. Chapter 7. Reunited, with Purpose. The community center in Seattle buzzed with the chatter of children as they filtered out of the room, leaving Emily standing quietly among the small wooden chairs, still clutching the boy who fell off the Mayflower. Her eyes locked onto Alexander, who stood at the threshold, the alchemist in hand, his face a mix of resolve and unease she'd never seen before. The space between them grew heavy, as if all the days apart, the misunderstandings, and the pain converged in this single moment. Emily opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, unsure where to begin. Alexander stepped forward, each footfall echoing on the old wooden floor, and when he was just a few steps away, he stopped, his voice low and trembling. "Emily, I'm sorry." She frowned, a flicker of doubt in her eyes, but he didn't let her interrupt. He held up the alchemist, as if it were proof of what he was about to say. "I didn't know where you'd gone, didn't know what you were thinking, but when I saw you and Sophia talking that day, I turned her away. I didn't waver, not for a second. She's the past, and I don't want her back. But I didn't realize you'd seen. Didn't realize you thought I still cared. I searched for you all over Portland, then came here, because I couldn't let you go without making things clear." Emily stood still, her grip tightening on her book, her heart swirling between old pain and new spark of hope. "Why didn't you say it sooner?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp. He sighed, his gaze meeting hers. "Because I was an idiot. Because I didn't know how much I needed you until you were gone." Silence settled for a moment, broken only by the faint patter of rain outside the community center. Emily looked at him, seeing the sincerity in those once cold blue eyes, and felt a part of her heart soften. But before she could respond, Alexander closed the distance, pulling her into a hug, not tentative or awkward like that first embrace in the alley, but firm and warm, as if he were giving her his entire world. She stiffened in surprise but didn't pull away, feeling his breath against her hair. And then he whispered, his voice hoarse but steady, "I needed that first hug to survive. But this one, I need it to live." His words struck her like a sweet blade, dissolving the last of her doubts, and she wrapped her arms around him, her eyes blurring with tears. They stood like that for a long time, in the empty room, like two lost souls finally finding each other. When they pulled apart, Emily wiped her eyes, offering a faint smile. "I'm not coming back to Portland just because you hugged me." Alexander laughed, a rare smile lighting up his face. I know, but I hope you'll give me a chance to make things right. She studied him, thinking for a moment, then said, her voice firm, okay, but on one condition. We don't just live for each other. I want to do something bigger. Not just books, not just hugs, but something that helps people like we used to be. People who need someone when they're broken. Alexander nodded instantly, without hesitation. Whatever you want, I'll do it. And from that, the idea for the Hug Foundation was born, a nonprofit focused on mental health, building community libraries, and supporting women through crises, those who'd lost like Emily, been betrayed like her, or felt lost like Alexander. They returned to Portland together, not as a clearly defined couple, but as partners with a shared purpose. Emily went back to Powell's, but now part-time, pouring most of her energy into laying the groundwork for the organization. Alexander, with his resources, turned the idea into reality fast. He hired a small team of mental health experts, reached out to publishers for book donations, and secured a modest office in East Portland as headquarters. They named it the Hug Foundation, a simple yet profound title that echoed the embrace that had changed them both. Emily designed the logo, an open book with two arms embracing, while Alexander networked with donors to get the project off the ground. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Just months after launching, they hit their first hurdle: funding shortages. Though Alexander had dipped into his own pockets to start it, the costs of running the mobile library, offering free counseling sessions, and aiding women post-crisis far exceeded his estimates. Early donors hesitated, wanting proof of results before committing long-term, and the budget dwindled fast. One evening, in the Hug Foundation's small office, Emily sat amid stacks of papers, staring anxiously at the financial balance sheet. If we don't get more money, we'll have to cut the mobile library, or worse, shut down some programs. Alexander, seated across from her, tapped his fingers on the table, lost in thought, then said, I'll sell part of my company shares. Not a lot, but enough to keep us going a few more months. Emily looked up, startled. Are you sure? That's your company, Alexander. He shrugged, his tone calm. The company's what I built to prove I could. This is what I want to keep, for you, for the people we're helping. His decision breathed new life into the effort, but Emily didn't want it all to rest on him. She suggested a fundraising book day at Powell's, a big event with readings, used book sales, and a call for Portland's community to join in. She reached out to Jade, who'd softened toward her since her return, for help, and Jade agreed instantly. I still think you're crazy for forgiving him, but if it's for this, I'm in. The event took place on a weekend when Portland's rain paused, rare sunlight streaming through the shop's large windows. Hundreds showed up, donating books, buying old titles from Powell's, and listening as Emily and Alexander shared the Hug Foundation's mission. Kids from the mobile library came too, clutching favorite books and telling their stories, moving more than a few to tears. By day's end, they'd raised enough to sustain the organization for 6 more months, and Emily stood in Powell's, gazing at the crowd, feeling a pride she'd never known before. As the event wrapped up, Alexander approached her, holding 2 Stumptown coffees, an old habit of theirs. He handed her one, smiling. We did it. Emily took the cup, looked at him, and said, It's not that we did it, it's that we're starting. This is just the first step. He nodded, his eyes bright. Then I'll walk with you step by step. They stood there in Powell's amid old shelves and the community's laughter. No longer just 2 broken people, but 2 who'd found purpose. Not just for themselves, but for others. The Hug Foundation wasn't just an organization. It was a promise that no one would have to be alone in their own dark alley, as they once were. Chapter 8. Epilogue. The Alley That Started It All. 3 years had passed since Emily and Alexander reunited in Seattle, and Portland now breathed with a new vitality, not just because autumn had returned with its blazing red maple leaves, but because something greater had blossomed from the small alley behind St. Mary's Church. Once a dark, damp corner where Emily had hugged a stranger in the rain, it was now painted with vibrant murals, open books, clasped hands, and a large inscription on a wooden sign, Hug Alley, where healing begins. The idea had come from Emily shortly after they founded the Hug Foundation, a way to transform their starting point into a symbol for anyone needing a hug, a kind word, or simply a place to feel less alone. Alexander, ever practical, made it happen. He hired local artists to paint the walls, installed solar-powered streetlights, and turned the alley into a quiet Portland destination where people could pause, leave a positive note on a wall, or sit on wooden benches placed there for reflection. That day was the third annual Hug Day, an event Emily and Alexander held to inspire small acts of kindness across the city. Powell's books buzzed with laughter and voices as hundreds gathered, donating books, sharing free hugs, or writing messages to hang on the kindness wall. The Hug Foundation had set up outside the shop. Kids from the mobile library darted around the stalls, clutching favorite books, while volunteers handed out donuts from Voodoo Donut and hot coffee from Stumptown. Emily stood amid the crowd, dressed in a simple gray sweater, holding a latte, watching everyone with a radiant smile. She was no longer the quiet girl in the bookstore. She was part of something bigger, a community she and Alexander had built from their own broken pieces. Alexander stood nearby, holding the hand of a 1-year-old boy with light brown hair like his mother's and deep blue eyes like his father's. This was Oliver, their son, born just over a year ago, a sweet gift after they decided to commit to each other forever. Their wedding had taken place 2 years earlier, quiet and unassuming, in a small East Portland church with only a handful of close friends. Jade as bridesmaid, still joking that, "I can't believe you married that billionaire," and a simple vow, they'd not only love each other, but live for others. Oliver arrived later as a joyful surprise, a charming boy with a wide grin, always fiddling with the books his mom brought home. Alexander, though still reserved with strangers, was now a clumsy but devoted dad, learning to change diapers, mix formula, and sometimes singing off-key lullabies to Oliver in his deep voice, making Emily laugh every time she heard it. Hug Day wasn't just an event, it was a reminder of the journey they traveled over the past 3 years. As rare Portland sunlight streamed through Powell's large windows, Emily stepped out to Hug Alley, holding a small note she planned to pin to the wall. She paused, gazing at the now bright and welcoming alley, and memories of that first hug rushed back like a gentle breeze. She recalled that rainy night, kneeling beside a broken man, not knowing who he was, only that he needed someone. She remembered his stifled sobs blending with the rain, the way he relaxed in her arms, and the wedding ring she'd picked up and slipped into his pocket. Back then, she thought she was just helping a stranger, but now she realized that hug hadn't only pulled Alexander from his darkness, it had saved her from the loneliness she'd buried after her own losses. She smiled, wrote on the note, "One hug can change everything," and hung it on the wall, joining hundreds of other messages swaying in the breeze. Alexander approached her, Oliver toddling behind, clutching a small children's book he'd grabbed from a stall. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice low but gentle. Emily turned to him, looking at him and their son, then replied, "That first hug. If I hadn't done it, we wouldn't be here today. No Hug Alley, no Hug Day, no Oliver." He gave a soft laugh, bending down to scoop Oliver into his arms. "I think about that every day. You saved me, Emily, and not just that night." She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him and Oliver, and for the first time in years she felt whole. Not just because she'd found love, but because she'd found purpose, a family, and a way to embrace the world. The Hug Foundation, after 3 years, had grown far beyond its shaky early days. Thanks to fundraisers and community support, they'd expanded the mobile library to neighboring states like Washington and Idaho, added more free mental health counseling sessions, and built a small center dedicated to women post-crisis, a place where they could learn skills, read books, or simply find a safe space to heal. Emily and Alexander didn't stop there. They kept working together, now balancing their efforts with raising Oliver. Some nights they sat in the foundation's small office, Oliver asleep in a crib nearby, planning new projects. Other days they brought him to community events, raising him with the understanding that happiness comes not just from receiving, but from giving. As Hug Day drew to a close, The sun set behind Oregon's hills, painting the sky a brilliant orange. Emily and Alexander stood in Hug Alley, Oliver in his stroller beside them, still hugging his little book, his eyes drooping with sleep. They watched the crowd disperse, smiles on their faces. An elderly man approached, thanking them for the joy the mobile library brought his grandkids. A young woman hugged Emily, saying the Women's Center had helped her stand again after her husband left. These moments, small but meaningful, were why they never gave up. Emily turned to Alexander, taking his hand. "We've done it, haven't we?" He squeezed her hand, replying, "No, we're still doing it, and I'll be here, with you always." Their story began with a hug in the rain, in a dark alley no one noticed. Now that alley stood as a symbol of hope, kindness, and a love grown from wounds. Emily looked at Hug Alley, at Alexander and Oliver, and knew she hadn't just hugged a stranger once. She was hugging the world, with him by her side. She hugged a stranger once. Now she hugs the world, with him by her side. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together. Hey, dear members of the Soul Stories family, today we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Max Sullivan's 30th birthday didn't start like a love story. It began with thumping pop music in a small bar, flickering yellow lights shining on overflowing beer glasses, and the laughter of close friends drowning out the wind whistling through the window. Ellie Parker, in a blazing red dress that stood out like a flame, darted around like a whirlwind, checking the tray of fries one moment, dragging people to the dance floor the next. Max sat in a corner, wearing a simple light blue shirt, watching Ellie with a gentle smile. "Not dancing, old man?" Ellie shouted from the dance floor, waving her arms like she was conducting an orchestra. Max shook his head. "I'm terrible at it, you know that." But Ellie wouldn't let it slide. She ran over and grabbed his hand. "Come on, it's your birthday. No dancing means you're wasting it." Max was dragged out, clumsily following the beat, stepping on Ellie's feet for the 4th time, before they both doubled over laughing, collapsing into each other like kids. The party grew livelier as the night wore on. The close-knit group started playing Truth or Dare, a game Ellie always dominated because she never backed down from a challenge. When it was Max's turn, a friend named Sophie, known for stirring up drama, yelled, "Max, pick, kiss someone for 10 seconds or chug this beer." Max blushed, his hand trembling around the glass. "I'll take the beer." But before he could drink, a stranger from the next table suddenly cut in. "Kiss me, birthday boy. I volunteer." She winked, closing in on Max like a Category 10 hurricane, her overpowering perfume hitting him so hard he nearly fell off his chair. Max panicked, his eyes pleading with Ellie for help. Ellie got the hint instantly and jumped between them. "Hold up! He's mine!" She turned to Max and whispered, "Pretend to kiss me, quick, to get rid of her." Max froze. "What?" But before he could object, Ellie pulled him close, placing her hands on his shoulders like a seasoned actress. "Just pretend," she winked, and then, under the bar's hazy lights, their lips met. At first it was just a light touch, like two friends staging a scene to escape an awkward moment. Ellie even planned to exaggerate it with a loud "moi" sound for extra effect. But somehow Max didn't pull away. His hands unconsciously slid to Ellie's waist, gripping gently. His lips were warm, soft, with a faint hint of beer, not at all like the fake kiss Ellie had imagined. Ellie forgot to stop, her mind blank, aware only of her heart pounding like it might leap out of her chest. The kiss stretched longer than intended, from 2 seconds to 5, then 8, until their friends' cheers erupted like thunder. "Whoa, that's hot!" Sophie shouted, clapping wildly. Ellie burst out laughing, acting casual. "There, you're saved, leading man." She patted Max's shoulder, trying to play it cool. Max nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, thanks." But his gaze drifted somewhere else, like his system had just crashed. The stranger glared at Ellie, then stormed off, muttering something about annoying friends. The party rolled on, with everyone returning to their beer and music, but the air between Ellie and Max had shifted, though both pretended not to notice. When the party ended, Ellie and Max walked home in silence. The cool, late-night air hung around them as Ellie kicked a pebble, breaking the quiet. "Just a fake kiss, right? Don't get any ideas, Sullivan." Max chuckled softly. "Yeah, just fake. I wouldn't dare." But his voice was quieter than usual, as if he were trying to convince himself. Ellie glanced at him, then looked away, telling herself, "It's just a joke, Ellie. Don't overthink it." They parted at Ellie's door. She waved. "Good night, old man." Max nodded. "Good night, klutz." But once Ellie shut the door, she slid to the floor, clutching her chest. "What was I just thinking?" Meanwhile, Max, walking home, touched his lips and murmured, "Why don't I want it to be fake?" That night, neither slept, and the just friends boundary they'd upheld for 10 years began to crack from that unexpected kiss. But to understand why a fake kiss held such power, we'd need to rewind to when Ellie and Max were strangers who met at a fateful study group. Ellie Parker wasn't the type to daydream about a prince on a white horse. At 29, she was an event planner with wild curly hair, bright mischievous eyes, and a knack for turning chaos into a perfect party. To Ellie, love was like a fancy dish at a high-end restaurant. Nice in theory, but she'd rather have a quick grilled cheese sandwich. She was independent, lively, and had never truly fallen for anyone. Not because she didn't want to, but because no one had been interesting enough to make her pause her deadlines and look twice. Max Sullivan was different. He'd been Ellie's best friend for 10 years, a 30-year-old software engineer with a gentle smile and hands that could fix anything, from Ellie's broken laptop to the wobbly chair in her tiny apartment. Max was smart, kind, and always quietly there for Ellie through life's dramas, from the time she sobbed over an ex dumping her via text, to when she nearly lost her job after spilling coffee on her boss's dress. He never complained, just showed up with the same question. "You okay? Want me to grab you a milk tea?" And Ellie always replied, "I'm fine, but go get it anyway." They met in college at a study group. Ellie arrived late to after oversleeping from a horror movie marathon. Max was roped in after losing a bet with his roommate, choosing between the study group or parading around the dorm in a carrot costume. Luckily for Max, he picked the group, and from then on, he and Ellie became inseparable. They studied together, shared instant noodles, interviewed for jobs, and weathered bad days side by side. Once Ellie asked, "Max, why don't you ditch me for someone more normal?" He grinned, "Because you're the most interesting, abnormal person I've ever met." Everyone around them teased that they were an unofficial married couple. Ellie would scoff, "Max? I'd rather date my blender, at least it doesn't forget my birthday." Max would nod, "Yeah, I wouldn't date someone who drops their phone all the time either." But they both knew their friendship was the most precious thing they had. They declared in front of their friends, "We'll always be best friends, never a couple," then clinked their beers and laughed like it was an unshakable truth. Until Max's 30th birthday, the night Ellie had secretly planned for a month to do something special for the best friend who'd stood by her for a decade. She rented a small bar with warm yellow lights, invited their college crew, and even made a robot-shaped birthday cake by hand, because Max once joked he'd rather befriend a robot than a human. Standing before her mirror, smoothing her fiery red dress, Ellie told herself, "I've got to surprise Max so much he's speechless." And that night, with an unexpected fake kiss, proved that sometimes fate doesn't need paperwork to turn best friends into something more. The morning after, Ellie Parker woke up with a heavy head and a strange feeling clinging to her like the lingering smell of beer on her clothes. She lay in bed, blankets pulled up to her chin, eyes squinting as she tried to piece together what happened the night before. Max's birthday party, thumping music, the third, or was it fourth, glass of beer. Then that random girl clinging to Max like glue on a mousetrap. And, oh God, that kiss. Ellie jolted upright like she'd been shocked, hands covering her face. "What the hell did I do?" she muttered, her voice raspy from lack of sleep and the after effects of alcohol. She looked in the mirror, curly hair a tangled bird's nest, mascara slightly smudged under her eyes, and told herself, "It's fine, Ellie. It was just a fake kiss, a pretend move to save your best friend from a clingy nuisance. Totally normal, completely normal." But as she recalled the feeling of Max's lips on hers, warm, soft, and sweeter than necessary for a charade, her heart started racing again. "No way," she scolded herself. "Don't overthink it. That's Max, Max Sullivan, the old soul who drops his sandwich on the floor and picks it up to eat anyway. It's nothing." Across town, Max wasn't faring much better. He woke up on the couch, laptop still open on the table, a clear sign of a sleepless night spent pretending to work to distract himself from something. That something was the kiss with Ellie. Max sat up straight, rubbing his face, wondering if he dreamed it. But no, he remembered every detail, the way Ellie pulled him close, her whispered, "Just pretend," and the way her lips. God, he couldn't let himself finish that thought. Max stood up, pacing the room, muttering, "Calm down, Max. It was just a fake out. You and Ellie have been best friends for 10 years. Best friends don't think about each other like that. It's not allowed." But inside, he was a mess. Max didn't know what to say to Ellie. Call and apologize, act like nothing happened, or admit he couldn't stop thinking about that kiss. No, 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 he denied to himself. If I say anything, Ellie will think I've lost it. Or worse, she'll laugh in my face. Max decided the best move was to pretend everything was normal. After all, Ellie was the queen of brushing off silly stuff, right? By noon, Ellie got a text from Max. "Thanks for the party last night. I survived and didn't get kidnapped by that girl. Thanks to you." It came with a goofy, smiley face. Ellie stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keys before typing, "No big deal. Best friend duty. Last night was fun." She hit send, then immediately tossed the phone onto the bed like she'd committed a crime. "Fun, really? Ellie, are you stupid?" she berated herself. But she didn't want Max to think she was rattled. He couldn't know she'd stayed up all night over a fake kiss. That afternoon, they met at their usual coffee shop, a place where they'd spent hours venting about work or planning trips. Ellie walked in, forcing a casual grin. "Hey, old man, you look decent for someone who downed half a keg last night." Max laughed, pulling out a chair for her. "And you, klutz? I thought you'd sleep till night after throwing that party." They bantered, trying to slip back into their best friend routine. But nothing felt natural anymore. When Ellie reached for her coffee, her hand brushed Max's. Both yanked their hands back like they'd touched a flame. "Sorry," Ellie blurted, her face flushing. "It's fine," Max replied, but he stared down at his cup, avoiding her eyes. A moment later, he asked, "Last night, you okay with it? I mean, with that girl and everything?" Ellie nearly choked on her coffee, coughing. "Yeah, I'm fine. Totally fine. Just helping you out, no biggie." She laughed loudly, but her eyes darted to Max, trying to read his thoughts. Max nodded, but a storm raged in his head. He wanted to say, "I'm not fine at all. I can't stop thinking about you." But he stayed quiet, sipping cold water to drown the crazy idea. Ellie wasn't much better. She pretended to study the menu, but she was really wondering, why am I noticing how he holds his cup? What's wrong with me? The meetup dragged on in awkward bursts. When Max told a funny story about a coworker, Ellie laughed as usual, but her gaze lingered on his lips a bit too long. Max did the same. When Ellie tucked her hair behind her ear, he suddenly thought she was adorable, and his heart raced uncontrollably. They stole glances, then pretended to look away, like kids playing hide and seek with their own feelings. The breaking point came when they stood to leave. Ellie tripped over a chair, nearly falling, and Max caught her in a flash. His hands landed on her shoulders, his warmth seeping through her thin shirt. Ellie looked up, meeting his eyes, gentle, warm, but somehow different. "You okay?" Max asked softly. "Yeah," Ellie replied, but she didn't pull away immediately. They stood like that for a few seconds, close enough that Ellie could smell the familiar fabric softener on Max's shirt. a scent that now threw her off balance. Finally, Ellie stepped back, laughing awkwardly. Thanks. So clumsy, ha ha ha. Max nodded. Yeah, as usual. But as they parted, both glanced back one last time before walking away. Ellie got home, flopped onto her bed and muttered, I can't think about Max like that. I can't. Max stood at his door, gripping his keys, telling himself, she's your best friend, Max. Don't ruin it. But they both knew, after last night's kiss, something had shifted. The stolen looks, the accidental touches, all like pebbles rippling the still waters of their 10-year friendship. And no matter how hard they tried to ignore it, their hearts weren't listening anymore. Ellie Parker never thought her event planning job would turn into a mirror reflecting her tangled emotional life. But that Monday morning, when her boss called her into the meeting room and handed her a new assignment, everything veered off course. Ellie, you're organizing this couple's wedding, her boss said, sliding a folder across the table. They were best friends for 12 years before becoming lovers. Cute, right? Ellie nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, really cute. But her mind screamed, best friends turned lovers? Oh God, why does this sound like me and Max? She opened the folder, reading From Friendship to Forever Love on the sample invitation, and nearly dropped her coffee. Since the fake kiss at Max's birthday, Ellie had tried not to think of him that way. But now, every time she saw the couple hugging in photos, she pictured Max beside her in some goofy tux. No, she scolded herself. You're an event planner, not a friendship wrecker. Meanwhile, Max Sullivan wasn't doing much better. He sat in the company cafeteria across from Liam, another close friend he turned to for advice. I think I've got a problem, Max started, fidgeting with the spoon in his coffee. Liam raised an eyebrow. What? Forgot your computer password again? Max shook his head, sighing. No, it's Ellie. I might like her, like more than a friend. Liam snorted, nearly choking. Seriously? Ellie Parker? The klutz you once ran 3 miles for to retrieve her lost keys? Max nodded, blushing. Yeah, but since the birthday after that fake kiss, I can't stop thinking about her. I'm scared saying it will ruin everything. Liam slapped his shoulder. If you don't say something, someone else will swoop in. Ellie's adorable, man. Max's face darkened. Don't say that. I don't want to picture it. But fate, always eager to tease, soon threw Max a curveball he didn't see coming. That afternoon, while grocery shopping for the week, he ran into Jake, Ellie's ex from college. Jake, with his tousled hair and smug grin, spotted Max instantly. Hey, Max Sullivan, long time no see. How's Ellie? Max stiffened, gripping his cart. She's fine. Really fine, Jake laughed. Good. Tell her I still miss our old dates. If she's free, have her call me. We were great together. Max clenched his jaw, imagining punching Jake, but he just nodded. Yeah, I'll pass it on. On the drive home, Max nearly lost it. He was jealous, ragingly jealous, though he wouldn't admit it. Jake? The jerk who dumped Ellie by text wants her back? Dream on, he muttered, slamming the steering wheel until his hand stung. But then he wondered, what am I doing? What right do I have to be jealous? Ellie's just my best friend. He tried to convince himself, but the gnawing feeling wouldn't leave. That night, Ellie called Max for help. I need you at my place now, she said over the phone, her voice urgent. The client changed their mind. I have to redo the whole wedding plan by morning. Max didn't hesitate, grabbing his laptop and rushing over. When he arrived, Ellie was surrounded by scattered papers, her hair tied up with stray strands falling loose, her eyes red from stress. Thanks, Max. She looked up, smiling tiredly. I'd be lost without you. Max sat beside her, trying to act normal. Best friend duty. I'm used to saving you from deadlines. They got to work. Ellie read the client's requests aloud while Max typed furiously to revise the plan. But the air between them crackled, not from the task, but from their sudden closeness. When Ellie reached for a pen, her hand brushed Max's, and both flinched like they'd been shocked. Sorry, Ellie said quickly, her face flushing. It's fine, Max replied, avoiding her gaze. Later, Ellie stood to make coffee, and Max stole a glance. Her clumsily spilling grounds on the counter made him chuckle. You're the ultimate klutz. She turned, glaring. And you're the ultimate old man. Who wears a fully buttoned shirt at 30? They laughed, but their eyes started to falter. When Ellie sat back down, their shoulders touched, and they fell silent for a beat. Max cleared his throat, pointing at the screen. What do you think of this? White roses for the best friends to lovers couple? Ellie nodded, but her mind conjured her and Max amid a sea of roses. Yeah, nice, she said softly, hiding her ridiculous thought. By midnight, they weren't done. Ellie yawned, head dropping to the table. I'm exhausted, Max. Why don't we quit? Max smiled, resting a hand on her shoulder, rubbing gently. No quitting. I'm here. Ellie looked up, meeting his eyes. Kind, warm, and caring. Her heart raced and she turned away. Yeah, thanks. But his touch, his gaze made focusing impossible. At 3 a.m., they finally finished. Ellie sprawled on the couch, relieved. Done. You're my savior, Max Sullivan. Max sat beside her, grinning. And you're the cutest nightmare I've ever met. They locked eyes, laughing, but the laughter faded as their gazes lingered too long. Max unconsciously brushed a strand of hair from Ellie's face, and she didn't pull away. Tired? He asked softly. Yeah, but you being here helps, she replied, her voice nearly a whisper. The space between them shrank, the air electric. But just as Max opened his mouth to speak, Ellie shot up. I'll get water. She bolted to the kitchen, clutching her chest, scolding herself. Ellie, you're insane. Max sat back, gripping the couch, muttering, what was I about to do? That night they stayed up together, tense from work, but alive with unnamed feelings. And though they tried to deny it, their hearts had begun crossing the just friends line. Ellie Parker never imagined a casual question could turn her entire world upside down. It all started on a Friday evening when she and Max Sullivan were sprawled on her couch, rewatching an old comedy series, friends whose lines they could recite by heart. After that sleepless night working together, they'd both tried to keep things normal. But that normal now felt as fragile as the frosting on the cake Ellie had botched for Max's birthday. They laughed, bickered over the last bag of chips, but the air between them was laced with odd silences. In a fleeting moment of impulsiveness, or maybe to chase away the awkwardness swirling in her head, Ellie turned to Max, raising an eyebrow. Hey, you've forgotten about that night, right? The birthday thing. She kept her tone light, as if asking if he'd had breakfast. Max, mid-chip crunch, froze. He turned to her, his warm brown eyes flashing with something Ellie hadn't seen before. What thing? He asked, though they both knew exactly what she meant. Ellie laughed loudly, pretending not to notice the tension in his voice. The fake kiss thing? You seriously don't remember? Good, forgetting's for the best. She flailed her arm, knocking some crumbs onto the floor, then bent to pick them up, hiding her reddening face. But when she looked up, Max wasn't laughing along. He stared at her, silent for a long moment, then blurted out, I remember it. I remember that kiss. Time seemed to stop. Ellie's eyes widened, her jaw dropping so far she nearly lost the handful of chips she was holding. What? What? She stammered, unable to believe her ears. Max flushed, scratching his head, looking like he wanted to dig a hole and disappear. I said, I remember that kiss. It wasn't just pretend for me. I liked it. His voice trailed off, but each word hammered into Ellie's heart, leaving her stunned. Ellie didn't know how to react. She was shocked, flustered, and a buried part of her, the part she'd tried to suppress, suddenly stirred. You're joking, right? She asked, her voice trembling. Max shook his head, his gaze unusually serious. I'm not joking. I tried to forget, but I couldn't. Ellie, I don't know. All I know is everything's been different since then. Ellie stared at him, her heart pounding, but her mouth blurted something irrelevant. Are you drunk on chips or something? Max chuckled, though the smile was more sad than amused. Maybe, but I mean it. He looked down, avoiding her eyes as if he'd just confessed a terrible secret. Ellie sat still, her mind spinning. She wanted to say something, anything to break the heavy silence, but her throat was dry. She didn't push him away because deep down she remembered that kiss too. But she didn't dare admit it because that would mean tearing down the 10-year friendship wall she cherished. Finally, Ellie shot up, faking a cough. I'm getting water. Stay there. She bolted to the kitchen, clutching her chest, scolding herself. Ellie Parker, you've lost it. What did Max just say? And why can't you say anything back? Meanwhile, Max stayed on the couch, ruffling his hair, muttering, What did I just do? She definitely thinks I'm nuts. 10 years of friendship, gone because of one stupid sentence. After that night, Ellie started avoiding Max. She made excuses about work. I've got this best friends to lovers wedding to plan, crazy deadlines, to skip their usual weekend coffee meetups. Max's texts kept coming. You okay? Movie tonight. But Ellie replied curtly, Fine. Super busy. Catch you later. She didn't know how to face him after that confession. Every time she thought of Max, she saw his eyes, heard his soft voice, and felt her heart skip in a way she couldn't ignore. No way, she told herself. I can't lose Max. Friendship matters more than these dumb feelings. But Max didn't see it that way. After days of Ellie dodging him, he decided he had to act. He couldn't stand losing touch with his best friend, and now, maybe the person he loved. One afternoon, Max showed up outside Ellie's office, holding 2 latte cups, her go-to morning order, and a new resolve. When Ellie stepped out and saw him, she nearly dropped her files. Max? What are you doing here? Max smiled, handing her a latte. I know you're busy, but I don't want you avoiding me forever. Ellie, I'm serious. I don't want to just be your best friend anymore. Not if it means I can't be honest about how I feel. Ellie took the cup, her hands shaking. You don't say that. 10 years isn't a joke, Max. Max stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. I know, but I'd rather take the risk than keep pretending nothing's changed. Ellie looked at him, her eyes shimmering like she might cry. She wanted to push him away, to return to their carefree laughing days. But the way Max looked at her, sincere, warm, and hopeful, left her speechless. I need time, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Max nodded, smiling. I can wait. I've waited 10 years already. A few more days won't hurt. That night, Ellie lay in bed, hugging her pillow, her mind a mess. She missed Max, his smile, the way he was always there for her, and now that unexpected confession. She was scared of losing him, but also scared she was starting to admit she liked him too. Not just as a friend. Meanwhile, Max got home, sat at his desk, and held the bracelet he'd made for Ellie in college. A gift he'd never dared say was because he liked her. He told himself, I won't give up. Not this time. Both were wrestling between budding feelings and the fear of losing their 10-year bond. But after tonight, Max had decided to take the lead, and Ellie, though still unsure, couldn't deny her heart was leaning toward him. Ellie Parker never thought she'd become the office spotlight, at least not like this. On Wednesday morning, as she sat buried in paperwork, finalizing the best friends to lovers wedding plan, the receptionist burst in with a vibrant bouquet of red roses. Ellie, someone sent you these, she squealed, as excited as if she'd won the lottery. Ellie looked up, frowning. Who? A client. But when she took the flowers, a small card slipped out, and Max Sullivan's familiar handwriting hit her like a jolt. Thanks for being the best friend for 10 years, but I'm hoping for more. Max. Ellie nearly dropped the bouquet. Her face burned, her heart raced, and her co-worker started buzzing. Ooh, someone's got a suitor. Ellie, spill it. Who's this guy? She forced a laugh, stuffing the card into her pocket. Just my best friend messing around. No big deal. But inside she was a storm. Max Sullivan, have you lost your mind? Sending flowers to my office with a note like that? She was annoyed, yet giddy, though she wouldn't admit it. The bold red roses sat on her desk all day, and every glance at them brought back Max's eyes when he said, I remember that kiss. That evening, Max texted, You free? I want to take you to dinner. Ellie stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the screen. She almost declined, like she'd been avoiding him for days. But then she thought of the flowers, Max's gentle smile, and typed, "Yeah, okay, but no more weird stuff." Max shot back, "Can't promise that." They met at a cozy Italian restaurant downtown, with warm golden lights and the faint scent of pizza in the air. Max wore a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, familiar yet somehow new. Ellie opted for a simple green dress, trying to look calm despite the chaos inside. When she walked in, Max stood to pull out her chair, smiling. "You look nice, Ellie," she glared. "Don't flirt randomly." "I'm hungry. Order already." Max laughed, but his eyes were softer than usual. Dinner started with clumsy small talk. Ellie rambled about the wedding she was planning. Max griped about a software bug he'd fixed at work. But when the main course arrived, a steaming plate of spaghetti bolognese, Max shifted gears. He set his fork down, looking straight at Ellie. "Remember sophomore year in college, when you lost your wallet and I ran all over campus to find it for you?" Ellie nodded, smiling. "Yeah, and you found it in a trash can. I still say you're a superhero." Max grinned, but then continued softer. "I liked you back then, Ellie. But you didn't know." Ellie stopped chewing, a strand of spaghetti nearly slipping from her mouth. She gaped at him. "You? What did you just say?" Max scratched his head, sheepish but unyielding. "I'm serious. Sophomore year, I liked you. Like, wanted to hold your hand, take you for pizza instead of just eating ramen together. But I was scared you'd think I was weird, so I kept quiet." Ellie swallowed hard, her mind reeling. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" she asked, her voice shaky. Max shrugged. "Because you're Ellie Parker, the klutz who always keeps me on my toes, but also my best friend. I didn't want to lose you." The air grew heavy, yet electric. Ellie's heart raced, not from hunger or the wine, but from how Max looked at her, like she was his whole world. She was torn. Part of her wanted to laugh, to say, "You're crazy, Max," like always. But another part, the one she'd buried since the birthday, stirred awake. I don't know what to say," she mumbled, staring at her spaghetti to dodge his gaze. Max smiled faintly. "It's okay. I just wanted you to know." Dinner ended in awkward yet sweet moments. As they left the restaurant, night had fallen, and a cool breeze swept through. Max walked beside Ellie, hands in his pockets like he was holding something back. Then at a street corner waiting for the light, he suddenly took her hand. Ellie flinched, feeling his warmth spread through her fingers. "Max!" She looked up, startled. He met her eyes, gentle but resolute. "I want to try, Ellie. Not just friends, but more. You don't have to answer now, but I want you to know I'm serious." Ellie froze, her heart pounding. That grip, bold, warm, and meaningful, made her want to hold on and run away at once. She thought of the past 10 years, Max fixing her computer, their pizza nights laughing together, and the fake kiss that changed everything. But then the fear of losing him surged. She pulled her hand back, forcing a smile. I'm not ready, Max. I need to think." Max nodded, not pushing. "Okay, I get it. I'll wait." They walked silently to Ellie's car. When they got there, Max opened the door for her, smiling. "Thanks for tonight. Drive safe." Ellie nodded, climbing in. "Yeah, you too." But as she started the engine and glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing Max wave, she smiled, a mix of confusion and a hint of sweetness. "What's wrong with me?" she muttered, driving off, her mind still tangled. Max stood under the streetlight, watching her car fade into the distance. He sighed, hands in his pockets, whispering, "You're not ready yet, but I'll change your mind, Ellie Parker." He turned homeward, heart full of hope despite the uncertain road ahead. Ellie Parker never thought she'd become the type to obsess over Max Sullivan's every move. But after that fleeting, hand-holding moment the night before, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She told herself she needed space to think clearly, but fate had a way of throwing everything into chaos. On Saturday afternoon, while strolling through the mall to clear her head, Ellie caught sight of Max stepping out of a small coffee shop. He wasn't alone. Beside him was a tall, blonde girl in a white sweater, beaming like she'd just heard a hilarious story. Max smiled too, holding a to-go coffee cup, looking unusually at ease. Ellie froze behind a store rack, her heart feeling like it was being squeezed. Who's that? Why is he with her? She wondered, her mind spinning with a dozen theories. She recalled Max's words. I'll wait. But seeing him laugh with someone else, Ellie felt betrayed, though she knew she had no right to feel that way. So you've moved on, huh, Max? She muttered, clutching her bag tightly. She turned away, trying to keep her face neutral. But inside, a mix of anger and disappointment churned, impossible to explain. From that day, Ellie avoided Max completely. His texts, "You okay? I called, but you didn't pick up," sat unanswered in her inbox. When he called, she let it ring out, then texted a curt, "I'm busy." She was mad. Mad that Max seemed to have moved on. Mad that she cared this much. To prove she didn't need him, Ellie did something even she hadn't expected. She agreed to a date with Brian, a co-worker who'd been flirting with her for a year. "Yeah, tonight works," she texted Brian, her inner voice insisting, "I'm fine, Max. I don't need you." The date with Brian took place at a trendy bar. Dim lights, soft jazz humming in the background. Brian was decent, sharing funny office stories, but Ellie could only muster forced smiles, her thoughts drifting to Max. When Brian asked, "Do you like jazz?" she nodded, but her mind flashed to the time Max played his old rock playlist in the car, singing off-key until she had to cover her ears. She scolded herself. "Ellie, focus. You're on a date." But the harder she tried, the emptier she felt. Meanwhile, Max Sullivan sat in his small apartment, his heart heavy. He knew Ellie was avoiding him, but couldn't figure out why. The blonde girl Ellie had seen was Jenna, a co-worker who'd asked Max for software project advice over a lunch break. It was nothing more than a work meeting, but Max had no idea Ellie had witnessed it and misunderstood. He'd called her a few times, sent texts, but got only silence in return. What did I do wrong, he wondered, holding the bracelet he'd made for Ellie in college. A gift he'd never dared admit was because he liked her. He was disappointed but didn't blame her. He figured Ellie had decided friendship was enough and he should back off. Max stopped reaching out. No more latte runs to her office. No texts asking if she wanted pizza. He quietly returned to his routine, though every time he passed their usual coffee shop, he glanced inside, hoping to spot Ellie. "If you don't want this, I won't push," he muttered, but missing her kept him awake night after night. Ellie, meanwhile, kept pretending she was fine. She went to work, joked with colleagues, and even met Brian again, though she bailed early with a headache excuse. But one late night, while rummaging for clean socks, an old notebook fell from the top shelf. It was her college journal, long forgotten. Curious, Ellie flipped it open and froze when she saw handwriting that wasn't hers, mixed in with her own. Max's handwriting. He'd borrowed the notebook once during a study group, and Ellie had never closely read what he wrote. Now, flipping through, her eyes stung as she found lines like, "Ellie lost her pen for the third time today. I pretended to look for it so I could give her a new one. She's cute when she panics." Or, "She cried today because Jake dumped her. I wanted to hug her, but I didn't dare. I hate seeing Ellie sad." And the last entry, from their senior year. "I like Ellie, but she'll never know. Being her best friend is enough, right?" Ellie sank to the floor, clutching the notebook, tears streaming down her cheeks. Each line stabbed her heart, but also lit up what she tried to deny. Max had liked her for so long, not just since the fake kiss, but from the days when she was so clumsy, she dropped his whole world without noticing. She thought of all the times he'd been there, fixing her computer, buying her ice cream after breakups, and that firm hand-holding the other night. "I've been in love with Max without realizing it," she whispered, her voice choked. Ellie glanced at the clock, 1 a.m. She wanted to call Max right then, to run to his place and yell that she was sorry, that she liked him too, but she hesitated, her hand trembling over the phone. She was scared that Max had truly let go after her days of avoidance. She hugged the notebook to her chest, telling herself, "I have to do something. I can't lose him." Ellie Parker never imagined she'd be walking through the dark, under pouring rain, just to find someone. But after reading Max Sullivan's old journal entries, she couldn't wait another second. It was 1 a.m. on a Friday, the sky pitch black, and the rain coming down in sheets. But Ellie didn't care. She'd fallen for him, not just since the fake kiss, but from the days he quietly stood by her, from the words he'd written that she'd never noticed. She had to tell him now, even if it meant wading through the entire city. She didn't grab an umbrella or a raincoat, just threw on a thin hoodie and rushed out, her car keys rattling somewhere in her bag. The rain soaked her instantly, her hair sticking to her face, but Ellie drove through the slick streets to Max's apartment complex anyway. When she arrived, she parked crookedly by the curb, stepped out, and ran across the lot, water splashing under her feet. Max's door was on the first floor, no awning above it, just a plain wooden door under a dim yellow light. Ellie stood there, drenched, her trembling hand pounding on it, her heart thudding like it might burst. "Max, open the door, please," she muttered, teeth chattering from the cold. Inside, Max sat in his living room, wearing a loose gray t-shirt and shorts, holding a soda can, his eyes fixed on the TV but not really watching. He'd tried not to think about Ellie for days, but missing her kept him awake. When the knock came through the sound of the rain, he jolted. "Who's that at this hour?" He got up, opened the door, and nearly dropped his soda when he saw Ellie, soaked head to toe, hoodie clinging to her, eyes red, staring at him like the world was about to collapse. "Ellie, what are you doing here?" Max asked, voice panicked. He stepped forward, grabbing her arm. "Come inside, you're soaked." But Ellie shook her head, staying put in the rain. "No, I have to say this first." Water streamed down her face, but she locked eyes with him, her voice shaking. "I don't want to be your best friend anymore." Max froze, the rain starting to seep into his shirt. He thought Ellie had come to end it all, to choose friendship and erase everything else. But then she stepped closer, so near he could see her breath in the cold air. "I don't want to be your best friend," she repeated, tears mixing with the rain, "because I want you to be more. I like you, Max. I've liked you for so long and didn't know it." She paused, shivering. "I'm sorry for avoiding you. I don't want to lose you." Max blinked as if he couldn't believe his ears. Then he laughed, a joyful, unstoppable laugh. "Ellie Parker, you're absolutely crazy," he said, stepping fully into the rain and pulling her into his arms. He hugged her tightly, water pouring over them both, but his warmth cut through the chill. "I like you too. I've liked you for so long," he whispered, his voice soft against the storm. Ellie looked up, rain rolling down her cheeks. She stood on her toes, hands on his shoulders, and kissed him. This wasn't the fake kiss from before. No cheering crowd, no excuse to hide behind. This was real, deep, and fierce. Max's lips were warm against the cold rain, his hands gripping her waist, pulling her closer. Ellie kissed back, fingers threading through his wet hair, the rain and their breaths mingling until she forgot everything else. They kissed like it was the only way to say all they'd held back for 10 years. When they parted, both were breathless, rain dripping from their hair onto their faces. Ellie grinned mischievously. "Are you hooked on me yet?" Max laughed, tugging her inside. "I was hooked since the first kiss, Ellie. Come in, you'll get sick." He shut the door, their wet clothes leaving puddles on the wooden floor. Max dashed to his bedroom, grabbing an oversized t-shirt of his and handing it to her. "Put this on, you're drenched." Ellie nodded, her shaky hands peeling off her soaked hoodie, revealing a thin shirt clinging to her skin. Max turned away, blushing. I'll get a towel." But Ellie caught his hand, pulling him back. "Don't go." She looked at him, her eyes soft yet intense. "I want to be close to you." Max paused, meeting her gaze. The air between them heated up, despite their shivering. He stepped forward, his hand brushing her cheek, then kissed her again, this time without hesitation. The kiss deepened, grew bolder, like neither wanted it to end. Ellie wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, and Max lifted her onto the edge of the nearby dining table. Wet clothes rubbed together, but the cold didn't matter anymore. They let their emotions take over, his hands slipping under her shirt, skin on skin, breaths intertwining. It unfolded naturally, passionately, and full of love. They tumbled onto the couch, wet clothes discarded in a messy pile on the floor. Between kisses, Max whispered, "I've wanted you for so long." Ellie smiled softly, kissing him back. "Me too." That night, they didn't stop at kisses. They gave each other everything, the only way to bridge the last gap between them. It was their first time, clumsy but true, and they both knew there was no going back. When it settled, they lay on the couch, wrapped in a thin blanket, their body heat warding off the rain's chill. Ellie rested her head on Max's chest, murmuring, "I can't believe I ran here like this." Max stroked her hair, smiling. "I can't believe you made me this happy." She looked up, asking quietly, "What now?" Max took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Now you're mine. Not just my best friend, but more." Ellie laughed. "More? Like your girlfriend." Max shrugged, kissing her forehead. "Call it whatever, as long as you're here." They didn't label it precisely. It was beyond friendship, not quite traditional love, but something sweet, fierce, and theirs alone. Ellie yawned, snuggling closer. "I'm tired." Max pulled the blanket over her. "Sleep. You ran through the rain all night." Outside, the rain kept falling steadily, but inside the small apartment, the air felt like a summer morning. They'd begun, not with grand declarations, but with a rainy night, kisses, and an irresistible connection. For Ellie and Max, it was the perfect start. Ellie Parker and Max Sullivan never thought their 10-year friendship could blossom into something so sweet. But after that fateful rainy night, everything changed. They didn't rush to label their relationship, but both knew it transcended friendship, filled with clumsy, endearing firsts. A month later, they decided to take a trip together, not a lavish getaway to Hawaii or Paris, but a small coastal town a few hours' drive from the city, with peaceful beaches and cozy seafood shacks. The trip was a delightful mess. Max insisted on driving, but he got lost 3 times, too busy singing along to his old rock playlist, until Ellie snatched his phone to turn on the GPS. "You're a software engineer and worse at maps than me?" Max laughed. "I'm good at fixing computers, not roads." When they arrived, they rented a tiny wooden cabin near the sea. Ellie flopped onto the bed the moment they walked in. "This is our first vacation together. Don't ruin it." Max nodded, but then spilled an entire soda can onto her suitcase while unpacking, prompting Ellie to yell, "Max Sullivan, I take it back." Even so, those days were packed with memories. They cooked together. Max attempted grilled fish, but forgot to flip it, leaving one side charred and the other raw. Ellie doubled over, laughing. "You cook like this and think we can live together?" Max shrugged, offering her a burnt piece. "Try it. You might like it." Ellie grimaced but took a bite, then faked a faint to tease him. At night, they sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, stargazing with their hands intertwined. "I like this," Ellie whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. Max kissed her hair. "Me too." After the trip, they decided to try living together, not fully moving in, but spending a few days a week at each other's places. Ellie arrived at Max's apartment with a suitcase of clothes and a long list of habits he needed to change. "No more wet towels on the bed, got it?" she nagged on the first day, holding up a soggy towel he'd left out the night before. Max nodded, but the next morning she found another on the couch. "Max, are you doing this on purpose?" He grinned. "I forgot, honest." "Forgive me, klutz." Ellie glared, but then laughed. She wasn't much better, having spilled coffee on his laptop the week before, forcing him to fix it all night. Those everyday moments made their love feel real and close. Max was a terrible cook, but insisted on making breakfast for Ellie, usually burnt eggs or grilled cheese stuck to the pan. Ellie grumbled, but whenever Max hugged her from behind while she washed dishes, she melted. "You're lucky I like you, or I'd have kicked you out ages ago." They watched movies, argued over the remote, and fell asleep on the couch with popcorn scattered everywhere. It wasn't the perfect love of movies, but the love of 2 best friends learning to love each other in their own way. Then one day, everything changed forever. It was a typical Saturday evening. Max was fumbling in the kitchen, attempting beef stir-fry in a rare bid to impress Ellie. She sat at the table, typing on her laptop, glancing at him. "You sure you won't burn the house down?" Max turned, spatula in hand, winking. "Trust me, this time it'll be good." But a burnt smell soon wafted over, and Ellie burst out laughing as he dropped the salt and pepper on the floor. "I knew it!" Max shook his head, set the spatula down, and suddenly faced Ellie. He wiped his hands on his apron, took a deep breath, and knelt right there in the kitchen, amid the spilled seasoning and the smoky pan. Ellie's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Don't tell me you're begging me to eat that." Max smiled, pulling a small box from his pocket and opening it to reveal a simple, shimmering silver ring. Understated, but stunning. "Ellie Parker," he said, voice trembling slightly. "I used to think I could be your best friend forever, but now, I just want to call you my wife." Ellie's jaw dropped, hands flying to her face. "You? Are you serious?" she stammered, eyes glistening. Max nodded, the ring still speckled with a bit of pepper from the floor. "I've never been more serious. I love you. Love how you nag me. Love how you spill coffee on my stuff. Will you marry me?" Ellie laughed, tears rolling down her cheeks. "You're the biggest idiot I've ever met, Max Sullivan. But yes, I will." She threw herself into his arms and they tumbled onto the kitchen floor amid the mess. Max slid the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking so much he nearly dropped it again. Ellie grabbed his hand, pulling him up. "You propose like this and don't burn the house down. That's a miracle." Max laughed, kissing her. "I can't promise good cooking, but I promise to love you forever." Ellie kissed him back, long and sweet, the burnt smell from the pan fading into irrelevance. After that moment, they sat on the kitchen floor, leaning against each other, staring at the ring sparkling on Ellie's hand. "I didn't expect a kitchen proposal," she said, giggling. Max shrugged. "I planned something more romantic, but you know I suck at planning." Ellie rested her head on his shoulder. "This is romantic enough. You're enough for me." Their love wasn't flawless. Max still left wet towels everywhere. Ellie still clumsily spilled things. But they loved each other genuinely. From best friends, they'd become lovers. And now they were set to embark on a new journey. Not just more than friends, but forever. Ellie Parker and Max Sullivan's wedding wasn't a lavish affair with hundreds of guests or a Hollywood-style gown. They opted for a simple ceremony in a small park near the city. Tall oak trees, lush green grass, and a little lake glimmering in the afternoon sun. Ellie didn't wear a traditional wedding dress, choosing a plain white ankle-length one instead, her hair loose with a few tiny flowers tucked by her ear. Max wore a white shirt and slacks, sleeves rolled up as always, but today he glowed brighter than ever. Only about 30 people attended. Family, close college friends, and a few co-workers who'd witnessed their journey. No orchestra, just a friend strumming acoustic songs on a guitar. Tunes Ellie and Max used to listen to while eating ramen in the dorms. As Ellie walked down the aisle, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked herself, Max waited at the end, hands in his pockets, grinning. "You're 5 minutes late, klutz." Ellie shot him a look. "You're lucky I didn't drop the flowers, old man." The ceremony was filled with laughter from start to finish. During the vows, Max had everyone cracking up. "I promise to love you, even if you spill coffee on my laptop a million more times." Ellie replied, eyes shining but unable to resist. "I promise to forgive you, even if you leave wet towels around for the rest of our lives." They exchanged rings, simple silver bands Max had picked, knowing Ellie didn't like anything flashy. As he slipped hers on, his hand shook until Ellie whispered, "Calm down, you're marrying me, not fixing a computer." Max laughed, pulling her close and kissing her, before the officiant could say, "You may kiss the bride." The reception unfolded on the grass, with long wooden tables covered in checkered cloths, pizza from their favorite spot, and a cooler of beer instead of fancy champagne. Their college friends, who'd heard them swear, "We'll never date," teased relentlessly. Sophie, the drama queen, shouted mid-party, "Who'd have thought these two would marry? I bet $10 they'd split in a month." Ellie tossed a bread roll at her. "You lost. I'm sticking to Max for life." Max nodded, arm around her. "Yeah, I'm not escaping either." As night fell, they danced their first dance under string lights hung in the trees. Max clumsily stepped on Ellie's feet twice, making her laugh and scold. "You're worse than at your birthday party." Max shrugged. "I didn't promise to dance well, but I won't ditch you mid-floor." They held each other, swaying slowly amid cheers and claps. Ellie rested her head on his chest, whispering, "I never thought we'd get here." Max kissed her forehead. "I always hoped. just didn't dare say it. Their wedding night took place at Max's small apartment, where they'd pulled all-nighters working, argued over wet towels, and shared their first kisses. No luxury hotel or rose petals, just a simple bed with slightly messy sheets and the two of them. Now husband and wife. Ellie lay there, still in her white dress, giggling as Max struggled to untie his soggy sneakers from dancing in the park. "You're as clumsy as me, husband." Max looked up, laughing. "Hearing you call me husband still feels weird." He climbed onto the bed lying beside her, their hands intertwining. They fell silent for a moment, the ceiling fan whirring and a light rain tapping the window, a gentle echo of the night. Ellie ran to him. Max turned, gazing at her tenderly. "You know, if I'd known one fake kiss would get me you, I'd have faked it 10 years ago." Ellie laughed, swatting his chest. "If you'd tried that early, I'd have run off." "Lucky you're patient." She snuggled closer, tracing the ring on her finger. "I love you, Max," she said, soft but certain. Max pulled her into his arms, kissing her hair. "I love you too, Ellie. Since the day you dropped your pen in study group, I knew you'd be my biggest trouble." Ellie looked up, winking. "You're cute as trouble, right?" Max nodded, drawing her into a long, deep, sweet kiss, the kiss of two best friends turned soulmates. That night, they didn't need grand words or gestures. They lay there holding each other, laughing about old memories, from Max fixing her computer to Ellie burning his birthday cake. Once they'd sworn we'll never fall in love in front of their friends, thinking friendship was their limit. Now they'd stepped through a new door together. For Ellie and Max, love wasn't a destination, but a journey, one that began with a fake kiss and ended with a vow of forever. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.